Home would like to acknowledge the original stewards of whose lands this podcast is recorded on. In York Region, we recognize we're on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and that this is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In Vancouver, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, whose presence on these lands continue to this day.
Welcome, Housers, to another episode of On the Way Home. Some cool swag we have. This is On the Way Home hat. And listen, guess what? This podcast is brought to you by, in partnership with the good folks at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Why I tell you that is that their next conference is in October in Halifax. You want to go. Awesome speakers, awesome keynote speakers, awesome presentations, awesome collaboration. It's so cool in Halifax, which is gorgeous in October. Registration has opened up. We'll be there. You can buy one of those great hats and visit us at the podcast booth. It's going to be another great conference. Every year they have over 1,000 people there from all walks of life, from all over the world. So you want to be there too. Go to caeh.ca, check out their website. And they do much, much more. So there's lots of training and other information there, other ways you can be to help you with your advocacy efforts. Check out their website, an incredible organization. We're so proud at Blue Door, where I'm from, to partner with them. Let's talk a little bit about Blue Door. Blue Door is an organization that I work for. It is located primarily in York Region. I say primarily because we do a little work in Peel, which is to the west of us, and Durham to the east. We are north of Toronto in Ontario. Primarily, we do a lot of work with our most vulnerable around emergency housing, transitional housing. We do wraparound supports. We get medical supports for our individuals. And we run a really cool employment social enterprise, construction social enterprise called Construct, which is just kind of exploding as we put 200 people over the last couple of years into the trade. So we desperately need to build the millions of homes we need across this country. They go into jobs that pay them a living wage automatically, and that can only grow from there. It's meaningful work. It brings in revenue to Blue Door, so we can do things like housing and other programs not in the backs of government. A huge win-win-win. Very, very cool. That is called Construct. If you want to check out that, or maybe one of our other programs like our Inclusion, INN, like an inclusion program for 2S LGBTQ plus youth, the first of its kind, north of Toronto. Check that out as well. You can go to bluedoor.ca and find out about all of our programs at that website. I work with an incredible group of people doing life-changing work, and I'm grateful to them. Let's talk about today's guest on the way home. Today I talk with Gary Gladstone. Now, Gary is he's part of Rena, and Rena is an organization that works with individuals with developmental disabilities. They've been serving the GTA for over 50 years, or this is their 50th year. So 50 years of doing incredible, life-changing, impactful work. Why is Gary here on the podcast today? Well, as he says in our conversation, that was unbeknownst to me, 18 to 30% of people experiencing homelessness have developmental disabilities. And there's not a lot of targeted housing for people with developmental disabilities. And Rena aims to change that. In fact, there was some inclusion in the National Housing Strategy, and he's bringing that to life. Him and 29 other groups across the province coming together. They're really shining a light on this and trying to get lots more housing built. Rena has built a few beautiful examples of how this can be done, how it can be funded, but how it can be operated. I've personally had the pleasure of touring their most recent building. It was gorgeous, inclusive, and they don't just build housing. It really is a community within a community, and it doesn't just serve the individuals in the building. It's actually supporting the caregivers who have not only worked full time to support their children for years, but maybe haven't had the ability to take a vacation or get rest, or maybe they're seniors in their late 70s or early 80s, and they just need a break or can't physically do it anymore. Gary and I discuss all of that in our conversation, the great work of Rena, what his hopes for are in working with government for individuals around housing for individuals with developmental disabilities, what the future could look like, what his hopes are, examples of how it can be done. He shares some incredible stories of how affordable and supportive housing has impacted the lives of some individuals they've worked with at Rena and their families. You don't want to miss this. I really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. So happy to have Gary Gladstone here. Gary, thanks so much for making the time to join the show today. Welcome to On the Way Home.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Thrilled to be here. You do incredible work. Blue Door is doing fantastic stuff, and just glad to talk to the people. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. We ask the same question of everyone that comes on, and everyone has their own, because it's very personal, their own unique answer to this. And that is, what does home mean to you?
Well, knowing what the question was going to be in advance, I figured I'd do what everybody's doing these days. And I went online to Chat GPT because I was really curious as to what artificial intelligence would say, what is home? And I'm telling you, it's pretty good. So Chat GPT says, home typically refers to a place where a person lives, where they feel a sense of comfort, safety, and belonging. It can be a physical space, such as a house, apartment, or any other place where a person resides. Home can also refer to a community or group of people with whom one shares common values, interests, or experiences. For many people, home is a place where they can relax and be themselves, surrounded by the people and things that they love. It's a place where they can create memories, find solace, and recharge. So I got to tell you, that was bang on. And the biggest issue that I have, Mike, is those with developmental disabilities currently have to wait 40 years to have a good home of their own at deeply affordable rent with appropriate supports. But we got to do something about that.
Absolutely, Gary. And that's something that we don't talk about enough on this show. We're going to dive into that because we talk about homelessness. There's a whole another population, as you just talked about, that kind of we have it discussed that sometimes goes under the radar, but it's people like yourself that and the groups that you lead that don't allow it to do so. But before we get into that, I want to know more about Gary Gladstone and his journey into this work. Tell me about Gary.
Well, thanks, and it's a pleasure. So, I guess I graduated from university with a Bachelor of Math and Computer Science 1 or 2 days ago, and worked in the computer field, being a volunteer in the charitable sector. And then I ended up becoming a professional fundraiser, very interested in politics. And then before I knew it, I was doing some government relations work. I had started my own consulting firm. And then I had a meeting with Brian Keshen, the CEO from Rena. And all of a sudden, I was brought on board 7 years ago, haven't looked back, and have been fighting the fight for one of the most vulnerable populations that I'm aware of, those with developmental disabilities, to make sure that they get their fair share in society and that society provides the most that they possibly can so these individuals can live a full independent life.
Amazing, Gary. That's quite a journey, and it makes sense. You're kind of putting your great skills and your passion together. You talked about Rena there. We want to learn more for viewers that are maybe outside of our province, outside of our country. Tell me, who is Rena? What do they do? What are some of the things you're proud of?
Well, if you can look behind me, Rena's celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. It's an agency that serves those with diverse abilities, open and accessible to all, firmly rooted in Jewish culture and values, primarily helping those with developmental disabilities and severe mental health challenges. We now assist about 1,000 people, about 500 and change in residential, 350-ish in our day program, which of course has changed and modified with COVID, and another 100 or so in our outreach program. Located primarily in Southern York Region, Richmond Hill and Vaughan, as well as Northern Toronto, the old North York area. But our influence goes much farther. We've helped start many agencies across the province, across the country, and around the world, affiliations everywhere. And we started, and I'm blessed to be chair right now, of the Intentional Community Consortium, which is 29 agencies across Ontario and Quebec looking to build and advocate for deeply affordable supportive housing for those with developmental disabilities.
Awesome.
And I can
Amazing.
go on for hours and hours and hours, but people can check out the Rena website at rena.org. And to find out more about what's happened over our past 50 years, we have a special 50th website, rena50.org.
Very cool. And congratulations on doing
Thank you.
50 years of just impactful, life-changing work. Very cool. Now let's talk about developmental disabilities and homelessness and affordable housing. How big of a deal is this? And what are we looking at? What's the challenge? What's the problem? What are you fighting for?
I'm fighting for individuals with developmental disabilities to be able to have their own home, to be able to have deeply affordable, supportive rental or ownership housing, depending. So, first, you need to know a little bit about those we support with developmental disabilities. Number one, 90% live below the poverty line, and in Ontario, they're on ODSP, which means they only have $522 a month for rent. In terms of homelessness, 18 to 30% of those in homeless shelters in the GTA, and we understand the numbers are similar across the country, have developmental disabilities. There's currently a 40-year waiting list for those with developmental disabilities for housing. So the positive news is this is the first generation where individuals with developmental disabilities are now outliving their parents. No more institutions, better supports, better food, better health care, better everything is allowing them to live much fuller lives. So now, very often, what's happening is the older adult with developmental disabilities is being cared for at home by their parents or siblings. And as the older adult child is aging, so are the parents. So now an adult with developmental disabilities living at home, 30, 40, 50 years old, parents are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. And of course, as you can understand, through life as the caregivers are aging, the amount of support they can give is not as great. And now we get the crisis calls not when the individual with developmental disabilities goes into crisis, but when their caregiver, as they're aging or for whatever reason, can't assist. And there's just not enough housing out there. About for every person who's housed, about 12,000 or so in Ontario, there's another 1.2 people that are waiting for housing, and the list is growing by about 1,200 individuals every year. So things got a bit better. In 2017, the federal government released the National Housing Strategy. And when they did, it was the first time that the vulnerable community, those with developmental disabilities, were recognized as a targeted vulnerable community that needed support from government. And in the strategy, it specifically states at least 2,400 units for those with developmental disabilities will be created. So slowly but surely, change is being made, but much more needs to be done.
Well, let's talk about that much more. You're a real creative guy. You're an innovator. So are the 29, is it, I believe,
Yeah,
organizations
yeah.
that you're talking about. What
Well,
does
it's going to be 30 once Blue Door joins and decides you're going to build more housing. So it'll soon be 30.
For sure, for sure. What does that look like? What are the solutions, Gary? What have you seen? Have you seen things? Obviously, Rena's doing great work. You talk about that. Are there others around the world, models we can look at that say they've got this? Maybe it's something we should duplicate. What has to change or happen?
Well, lots has to change, and a lot has to do with government. So when the federal government has the money through the National Housing Strategy, which flows down to the provinces and then to the municipalities. Now, some of the municipalities realize that there's an issue, realize that there's concern, and need to help, and they do. But unfortunately, that's not true across the board. So, focusing in Ontario for just a minute, we now have a specific ask to the provincial government that as the provincial government is renegotiating the bilateral agreement of the co-investment funding of the National Housing Strategy with the feds to allocate 10% of every housing dollar when it goes down to the municipalities, that the municipalities have to spend that to support those with developmental disabilities. It can either be spent in terms of a rent supplement to in existing buildings to supplement the rent so it's more affordable. It can be given as capital funds to charities and nonprofits or other builders to build housing specifically for those with developmental disabilities or anything of the like. And that's really stage one. And then stage two is, of course, the housing. So Rena prides itself on our intentional communities, apartment buildings, if you will, with support in them that permit those that we support and other agencies. We have partnerships with many to live a very whole life as independent as they want to be, with the whole range of housing options, from group homes to apartment buildings to their own building with minimal support, depending on what they need.
You've done some of this work. Let's talk about some of the successful models. Can you talk about Rena? So when you with some of your housing, what makes it a little different? Like what is a great design when we're looking at a type of structure for affordable housing for individuals with developmental disabilities?
Sure. So let's take a look at the Lou Fruitman Rena residence, which was just opened up in Thornhill about 2 years ago. It's a six-story apartment building for 84 individuals with considerable recreation and program space in it. One, two, and three and four bedroom apartments. The individuals are tenants according to the Landlord and Tenant Act. We have supports not only from Rena, but our partner agencies. March of Dimes, Safe Haven, um, YSSN, creating alternatives, all to ensure that the individuals living there have the best and fullest life that they possibly can. Located right across from the promenade, those of your viewers familiar with Thornhill, in the middle of the community, surrounded by everything they could possibly want. As a matter of fact, it's about 5 minutes away from my house.
And listen, I've had the great opportunity to tour. It's a gorgeous building, just beautiful, well done. And it's a great example. I know you pulled, there's federal money, provincial money, and of course, Rena raised some funds. So it's a great example of how to fund it and do it. But also, you created a community within that building, right?
It's an incredible community. The individuals there support each other, they look after each other, they do many things together. So there's no congregate dining. Each apartment has their own kitchen, everyone cooks for themselves, but that's not necessarily the case because the friends on the floor get together and they'll have meals together. Either they'll cook together, their support workers will cook for them, but it's a family. I remember one story in particular at the inaugural community residence, the Rena community residence that's a tiny bit further north, where a mom got an apartment for her son. And all of a sudden, she called her son one night around dinner time just to find out what was going on. And she couldn't reach him and didn't know where he was, what was happening. She decided not to worry too much, but was a little bit concerned. Well, when she and her son connected that night, his response was, "Sorry, Mom, I was at dinner with friends, and we played poker afterwards, and I just got home a bit late." And when the mom tells the story, she says, "That's something I never thought I'd hear about my son. It was the best thing in the world, and thank God he's living at the Rena community residence." There's another individual who I was speaking with yesterday, Jamie, who's at the Lou Fruitman Rena residence, who's had mental health challenges for a number of years, has been homeless, has been couch surfing, has had addiction issues. He's coming out of his shell absolutely beautifully. He is recovering fantastically. He came down. We had a day on Parliament Hill, March 27th, about housing and developmental disabilities, and he was one of the speakers and telling his story. Not a dry eye in the house, and it's incredible that he's able to discuss it to such an extent, and that's just because he's got safety and surroundings within his home, much like ChatGPT described. It's a community. It's a place where he feels safe.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. And I'm sure there's so many more lives changed. You talked a little bit when you talked about Rena, the caregivers too, and I could just imagine. I mean, not only are you changing the lives of the individuals who are now able to, live semi-independently, build some new friendships, play poker, that kind of thing, but the caregivers as well. I'm wondering if you have any stories about caregivers whose lives you've impacted and changed.
Well, yeah, 100%. So I'd say about the second or third month when I was working with Rena, I was at an event and speaking with parents and speaking with some of the people living at the Rena community residence. And parents of brothers were telling me the story of number one, the brothers had not lived together for years, but now they were back together living at the Rena community residence. And this was the first time in years that the parents were able to take a vacation, go anywhere outside, knowing that their children were doing well, were being well looked after. It takes a village to raise a child, as we know. It takes two or three villages to raise an individual with developmental disabilities. And the stress and strain on family and caregivers is immense, and very often it's too much for one person to handle. Some of the individuals we support require two or three caregivers to one. So, the ratios vary depending on the needs, but no, it makes a tremendous difference knowing that your loved one is in good surroundings, in community, with people helping. And of course, you're still part of the equation. You're still visiting, you're still doing, they're probably coming home to you on the weekends. It just gives you the opportunity to be active in the community as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for people, for listeners to understand, I mean, say you're the parent of a child. Usually, now it's later. It used to be years ago, 18, they'd move away and do their own thing. Now, in the GTA, at least 50% of kids up to age 30 live at home, just mainly because of affordability, not because they want to be there. But can you imagine with the developmental disabilities? Again, that's a wide range of disabilities we're talking about, right? Some individuals are way more independent than others, but you can imagine that, as you said, never being able to take a vacation, being that constant caregiver who might be working full time as well, right? The strain that it puts on a family, and so the importance of this housing, the supportive housing, the wraparound services is incredible. And the stats you mentioned too, I don't think that Canadians at large really understand that of the 250,000 Canadians experiencing homelessness each year, what did you say, Gary? 18%?
18 to 30% have developmental
Yeah,
disabilities. And I just want to touch on something you were just saying. We also have a number of respite units. So during COVID, unfortunately, we had to close them, but now they're reopening once again. So individuals living with their families, when the family needs to go away for a short time, or maybe one or the other needs a break for one or the other, we have respite units available, as do many other agencies. And the space as well that the families can take advantage of as well.
very cool, and so needed. Gary, what does ideal? So if we were to look 10 years down the road, and all your dreams for this came true, what does that look like?
Well, I don't see why individuals with developmental disabilities are treated any differently than anybody else. So I'm going to look at my two boys. They have choices. They can either live at home and never leave. They can rent their own place. They can have roommates in an apartment. They can buy a home themselves with roommates or what have you. And my hope is that there's enough housing out there so the individuals that we support have those exact same options, can live where they want, how they want, and when they want. But we have a long way to go. And the way we're going to get there is by everybody talking to their elected officials at every level and saying, we've got to do something. We need more housing for homeless, absolutely, as well as for the vulnerable community of those with developmental disabilities.
You answered my next question before it was asked about how people can get involved. That's how good you are. Listen, I encourage everyone listen to Gary, and that's how it happens. Make it an election issue. Make it something that people are going to listen to because this is important and it affects us all of our communities. Gary, if someone wanted to support Rena, you mentioned the website. Let's mention it again. If they wanted to support Rena, follow, see what you're up to. Can you talk a little bit about where do they find out more information? How can they reach you? What are the socials, etc.?
Absolutely. Well, great stuff for virtual backgrounds. They can see how they can find us on the socials at Rena Foundation, hashtag Rena50, hashtag inclusion. You can check out our website, as I mentioned before, www.rena.org. And follow me as well at Gladstone CFRE. But just do a search on Gary Gladstone Rena and it probably comes up. But no, my pleasure. Get involved. Rena's having many events coming up. We're having Striking for Rena on May 26th, which is our one of our bowling fundraisers, and we'll be having other events for Rena at 50 throughout the year. Just check the website by all means.
Well, Gary, congratulations, and more importantly, thank you to you and the team at Rena for all the work you do, not only in supporting individuals with developmental disabilities and their families, but for the advocacy work you're doing and continue to lead across the country. It's so important, it's so impactful, and we're grateful for it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, but it's me who's got to thank you as well for making sure that the message gets out there and for the incredible work that you do, again, not only yourself, but through Blue Door. And thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you soon, Gary.
Bye.